everybody. Oh my God, I got a smooth guy on the channel today. Ooh, you're going to like this situation. What this brother got to say, he's serious too. He is well thought of. I mean, we own to something here at Strong Inspirations. I'm Anthony Brogdon, and I don't play with you. I give it to you straight, no chaser. I let the people do the talking so we can intoxicate your mind. Not staggering DUI, but staggering from what they got to say, so you will have to say, whoa, I didn't know that. Whoa, that I'm a better person by hearing this information. This is what I'm doing here. I'm an ordinary guy trying to do something extraordinary as a result of the people who come on the show. They vet me, man. Ladies out there, and they know that my intentions are well because I want you, my viewers, to hear this because it has made me a better person. There's no question about it. You're going to like what this young man's got to say. This is a serious situation here on today's show. So hit the subscribe button. It's free. I don't ask no money, nothing. You can donate if you so choose. But hey, I want you to get it. Come on now. Hit the like button on this video. You're going to like it a whole lot. Hit the notifications bell for when the videos come up. You get a ding, a shock, a smoke signal, something to let you know there is new content on Strong Inspirations. And I'm trying to put at least 1 or 2 up a week. We're over 500 videos here. Did you see the one I did with the guy whose great-grandfather, they bombed his house while he was protecting 16th Street Baptist Church? And it didn't do, they still got to the church too. Watch that video. Did you see the one I did with the lady, with the guy who is a very well accomplished, an attorney, professor at, I think it's Georgetown, but as an attorney, he was fighting for civil rights down in the, in the South, deep South. And he's an older gentleman. So let's say this is about the 50s and 60s. He said, I carried a gun with me every day, just in case one of them racists wanted to pull something. I was ready. He said, and then when they would be out there shooting their gun, I shot mine. You should watch that video. Did you see the one of the lady who said that her great-great-great-grandfather, might be 3 of them, who was enslaved? My man got his freedom and moved to Liberia. Watch that video. How about the lady whose great-great-great-grandfather got his freedom and was on one of them ships that ended up in Nova Scotia, Canada? Watch that video. How about the lady whose great-great-grandfather was Harriet Tubman's minister over in Canada? Watch that video. Just go down the list. It's a lot of them. It's over 500, like I said. Just go down. Look at any one of them. Come on, share this with your kids. Y'all sit around and watch it. You can go past me. Just scroll if you need to and get to where you want to get to. Watch this stuff. Hit the like button on it, too. Tell somebody. I really appreciate it, my friends. Come down June 7th through the 9th, 2024. I'm having my own festival in Kansas City, Kansas. It's called Freedom Quindaro. And for a nominal price, I will feed you the whole weekend at the fish fry on Friday and on Saturday at the gathering. We won't call it a picnic. And Quindaro in Kansas City, Kansas is, in my estimation, America's largest underground railroad stop. When they fled out of Missouri, they could go across that river and end up in Kansas. That's not to say that the man didn't come looking for him, but I got a guy on the show. When the guy came looking for him, he said, let me tell you something, sir. I'm not going back. So it's either your life or mine. And my man let him go. He thought twice about that one. He said, this guy's serious. He ain't coming back. Forget that little bit of money. So come check me out on that regard. Now, you might know I'm a filmmaker. Business in the Black is my documentary on the rise of Black business in America. There were enslaved Black folks who owned businesses. And I did not know that. They didn't teach that to me in school. And I was, a pretty decent student. So I want you all to get it. And it's in this film, which is streaming on Amazon. Then I took it one step further and I wrote this book. This has become America's #1 Black business history book. If you read my book and don't learn nothing new, I give you your money back. Boom shakalaka, a book with a money back guarantee. I'm that confident. And every 10th book I sell, I donate one to a school. And last year, I think I donated close to 400 something books. This year, I want to donate 10,000. I want to grow with y'all growing with me. So get you a copy of this. You go to my website, businessintheblack.net, and I will autograph it. And it is available on Amazon, but I don't ship the Amazon books. All right. Now, you hear me use this term strong a lot. Strong is my favorite word. In my world, strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is my introduction to the guest today. He's a strong soul, brother. Come on, man. Let's get it on. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I loved hearing your commentary. It reminds me of the days when we listened to the radio.
Yes, yeah, sure.
Being in Detroit, this is like, as my cousin Dwayne would say, like the radio capital of the country, if not the world. So it made me feel like I traveled back in time a little bit. So
Yes. Okay. Now tell us your name. Tell us your name.
So I am Anwar Uhuru. I am a professor in African American Studies at Wayne State University. I am a native Detroiter, so it is nice to be home.
Okay.
In academia, we have to go where the job is, so I'm very grateful that I get to be back home, and I've
Okay.
been home for 2 years now. So
Okay. Let me ask you a question. You let, and it's just a cue about you. Let my audience get to know you.
sure.
You said you're from Detroit. What side of town did may I ask?
So I am literally in my childhood home. So I am technically New Center, Boston area, Edison now, they've
Okay.
rezoned everything. So
Yeah.
I'm 14th and Taylor.
Okay. Did you know Detroit being a predominantly Black town as it is, and
Mhm.
I grew up here also. Did you know any white kids growing up? Or were you only exposed to Black people?
I grew up amongst kind of a melting pot. So I grew up with Polish kids, Filipino kids, but predominantly Black, but I did have that like mixture of both because of my age. So like as kids, as the whites were starting to leave, I still had that kind of interracial upbringing. And then when you hit your teens, you have a different experience of them. But I'm
Okay.
bummed.
Okay. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
So growing up, parents allowed us all to play together, but like as you're hitting that teen mark, girls aren't allowed to play with you anymore if they're white, and boys start realizing that they're white men. So then they start to have that separation because of probably what their parents were telling them. So like I would say from age like 2 to about 12, we all played together. But I noticed as we got into our teens, there was that division, and then oftentimes the kids then move away. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
so I feel like, and I mean, you hear older generations talk about this, where we were all, and you saw it during the 2020 protest, where it's like, when did I go from being cute to being a threat? And so I started to notice that as I was hitting my young adulthood, those same people who used to smile at me as a kid started to act a little different because obviously I'm getting taller, my frame is getting different, and I'm starting to be seen as a Black male who's about to be a man and not that little boy anymore. Uh,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
so that's what I noticed.
Yeah.
Growing up.
Let's delve into that just a tad.
Sure.
Do you
Mhm.
think it's the physique of Black men, or is that is so scary? I know the media plays up on it,
Mhm.
but why did they stop at a certain age? Because you're the same kid when you were 8, 9, 10, 11,
Right,
12,
right.
13.
Yeah.
What do you think why that the change happens?
Well, I know due to the racist history of being a black man or a black woman, it's that moment as soon as puberty hits, they start to see you as a man and the probability of if there's any type of romanticness between their daughter, their son, and
Yeah,
you, then all of a sudden there's a fear that, oh no, racial interaction and possible children could come about.
sure.
And you have to villainize us so that way she or he knows that don't go there. And of course, sometimes they do.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
And not just, I won't even just put it on white folks, but other races too, because I noticed that growing up amongst Arab descended people, Asian descended people, Hispanic too, and of course living here Jewish as well. So I noticed like if there's a possibility of a mixture, oh no, we don't want
Yeah,
to taint uh,
yes,
our
sure.
genes. We want to keep that genetic supremacy. So
Yeah, sure.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
in doing the work I do, you see this long history of fear of racial, what they call it, contagion, because that's really where like vampires and zombies and all of that comes from. It's this idea of contaminating pure raceness, and
Yeah.
white is always seen as pure. So any fear of mixture with that automatically creates a hysteria. So
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
We're gonna come back to that, but
Oh yeah.
let's stay on the childhood or even after that.
Mhm.
What do you know where the plantation is in your family?
So my genetic history, and I'm blessed to be able to trace it as far back as I can. We originated on my maternal and paternal side on the around the South Carolina region. And my maternal ancestor was sold to a planter in Mississippi around about 1850 or so. And then that ancestor had her daughter, who was literally born free. She was born like at that moment of emancipation in about 1865. That's what the records say. So that maternal ancestor that came from South Carolina to Mississippi, her name was Easter, and then her daughter Maggie was born free. So that's how we're able to trace it back. And we do have a family home in Mississippi. My grandmother inherited from her father, so we do have a home in Ripley,
Right on.
Mississippi. And my grandmother just came back about a right before Christmas, and I live in a lower flat from my maternal grandmother.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
very fortunate. And then my paternal grandmother lives on the east side of town. So
Yes.
and that side is from Lancaster, South Carolina. So there's a strong Carolinian lineage on both sides of the family. So
Okay. What was the child was a black guy?
so you mean
Yeah.
my
Yes.
oh who father? So
Yes.
this is where
Yes.
records get real fun. So
Okay. Okay. If you don't mind, I asked that
hey,
question.
there's
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Okay.
So my the ancestor from South Carolina, it says that she is labeled mulatta. And then my and her child is also labeled mulatto. And that's back when they would actually put that on birth records.
What does that mean, mulatto?
Mulatto mixed, meaning, mama's
Okay. Okay.
maybe, papa's maybe, which
Okay.
basically means fathered by a slave owner
Oh.
or his children.
Okay.
So they'll acknowledge that the child is mixed, but they won't acknowledge the paternity or who the father was, or in some cases, who the mother was. Um, so our descendant, so we're descendant of literally descendant of enslavers, and that is in the records. So when myself and my grandmother's first cousin were both compiling our genealogy from records and slave dockets, etc., and we were blessed to have descendants who were counted in the census. My ancestor Easter lived long enough to be put in the census, and she was able to give her origin. And it says Charleston, South Carolina, where she was born. And it says about, because she doesn't know the exact date. she was able to say, you know, my father was was a slave master, and they put mulatto, and then her child Maggie, they put mulatto as well, or mulatta, because that's the
Yeah.
feminine. And
Yeah.
so it's in the records that we're of mixed descent.
Sure. Sure.
And so that was that. And of course, as time progressed, I look at my great grandmother Annabelle, who was an identical twin, her sister Adabelle. You look and you go like, oh, it's proof, because I mean they were very fair, great
Right.
blue eyes, very fine hair. And for years, you know, a lot of people would say, oh, because we have Indian in the family, and it's like, maybe, but it's more
Yeah.
you got that master in the family.
Yeah. Sure. Sure.
And for
Sure.
decades and years, I understood why we within my family and we as Black people didn't necessarily acknowledge it, because there was no benefit really of being mixed unless you could pass. And then the trauma of passing for white is, one, you have to live your life as a fugitive, basically, or fear of being caught. But also, like, unless you could truly pass and nobody discover it, there's really no benefit of acknowledging that whiteness, because you're still Black. You're still treated Black. You're just lighter. So for us, we were like, no matter how fair you are or how chocolate you are, you're Black. So there was a level of pro-Blackness from the turn of the century I could trace all the way till now. We always acknowledged our Blackness in my family, and we didn't play colorism in my family. So that whole, oh,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, yeah, okay,
Mhm.
but hold on now.
Yeah,
I got to take exception only in this regard. Light
yeah.
skinned people did have it better. I mean,
I mean,
there were
to an extent,
organizations and stuff like
yeah. And
that only for light
I'm not
skinned people.
acknowledging that, especially in the month of
Yeah,
January with all of the fraternities and sororities celebrating
yeah,
their,
yeah.
you know. But I will say, in my immediate family, you know, there might have been one or two who played that colorism, but like I know from the fairest to the chocolate, we were all treated remotely, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, sure.
same. Um, as opposed to hearing stories of other relatives experiencing that blatant colorism where they weren't even allowed to sit in the front yard. They had to come through the back door of their
Oh,
own.
is that right?
Yeah, so like I've heard of stories from other people experiencing it, but in my immediate, in my maternal family, I would say I didn't witness it directly. Uh,
Yeah,
so we do so because there's variations of color in my family. So
sure, sure.
you know, and that's not to say when they went out in the world they didn't experience it, and having very beautiful cocoa cousins. Um, Hearing their stories of going to school is when they've experienced it. But within our family, it was like, no, you're beautiful. Like people would kill for that skin. You got white folks trying to tan themselves for that skin, and like stand up straight, acknowledge it. So we made it our business to always love on each other regardless of our melanin. But
Okay.
but I will say the world is the world, and we've experienced obviously colorism out in the world, but within my
Yeah,
family,
yeah, yeah,
I
sure.
know the women made sure that no matter how light or cocoa you were treated beautifully. You weren't you didn't focus on the external. It was like,
Okay,
how well can you read?
okay,
How well
okay,
can you, you know, so like, so in
okay.
my family, like, regardless of how gorgeous somebody is based on melanin or not, the number one thing that was prized in my family was education.
I got you.
So, you know, so
I
that was
got you.
the thing. So yeah, so that's not to say that we
Eh,
didn't experience it, but that was like, no, like how well
Yeah,
can you read? How well can you articulate? How
yeah,
well
I
can you
got
work
you.
the math? You know, so
Let me ask you this. You and
yeah.
I'm gonna go back just a second. You had heard stories of somebody saying you got to come in the back door because you're darker complected
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
within the own family?
So on my paternal side, they're from South Carolina and similar mixture. And I remember my grandmother telling me her great grandmother would say some racist stuff because she was very fair. She had red hair and green eyes, and she's very chocolate. but a stunning woman. And so she'd be like, "Who's that blank baby?" And she's like, "That's your great granddaughter." It's like, "No, it's not. We don't have babies that dark." And so he did
Really?
tell me. So on my maternal side, there's like, love your skin, love who you are. But on my paternal side, there was that issue of colorism that was experienced.
Hold on, let me
Yeah.
stop you there. Let's delve
Uh,
into that a little bit. How could that
mhm.
light-skinned person feel that about another black person, but darker person?
Yeah, because
What do you think that psyche came from,
oh,
and how they did that to him?
it's it stems from the plantation where like whatever proximity you have to white means that you are no longer that thing, and some masters or whomever would separate the children or allow the child to pass for white or put them in a situation in which they could be white or be viewed as white or the ideal. And as time, and oftentimes ignorantly, if they didn't know any better, they meaning white folks, they would assume the person's white. So they had that like kind of passport, if you will, in ways that a melanated person never would. And so one then starts to think that their entire value is what they presented on the outside.
Right.
But
Okay,
yeah,
I
but like
got you.
yeah.
Okay,
So
I got
but
you.
yeah, but that's where it comes from. And sadly, to this day, even in our own community, if you think about who is aesthetically the ideal, it is
That's
someone
right.
who has the lighter features, the finer nose, the thinner lips, the
Yeah,
straighter hair.
yeah,
And it's really sad because I think Lupita Nyong'o, Naomi Campbell, Grace Jones are some of the most stunning women on the
yes,
planet, but
yes,
they're not always seen that way, or they always have to present as aggressive or a
yes,
warrior. And that's not to say that women can't be those things, but just
yes.
gaze upon those three in particular, you have oftentimes in society we have to see beyond their color,
That's right.
and that's really sad because my automatically that's who I go to first in terms of like just jaw-dropping beauty, let alone pretty much the entire cast of Black Panther. We just go
Right,
there.
right. That's right. That's right. Let me ask
Uh,
you this:
yeah.
growing up as you did,
Hmm.
with white kids initially, did you ever
Yeah.
wish you were white?
No.
So you always had a sense of your blackness and that kind of thing. Your parents told you this, so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, I never had internalized white supremacy on that
Yes.
regard. And it was interesting because of my intellectual aptitude, I always was in like an honors course or so on and so forth. And then my parents were just like, you know what, put him in private school because and so of course I was in around white kids all the time.
Right.
And then even as I got older, my mom when I got into college, jokingly, I was like, there ain't no black people, to date or go out. And my mom was like, "You've only dated black?" And I was like, "Of course." And she was like, "Well,
Oh, really?
she was like,
She
well,
even asked you that?
she even asked me, and it wasn't to be harsh. She was like, because I had been around white kids so often and been friends with them. And so I was like, no, I don't see them that way. And as time progresses on, you and it's like,
Yeah. Oh,
and, and
okay.
and personally, it's because I refuse to have to translate myself to somebody, regardless of how wonderful they are as a person. There's just cultural blind spots often. Um, and I've had my male friends, female friends, straight, not straight friends, all have that similar experience of like how much more work they have to do when they do date
Oh, I love it.
interracially.
Yes, yes, yes,
And that's
yes,
not to
yes.
say that there aren't some wonderful, successful
Sure,
interracial
sure,
relationships. There
sure,
are. But
sure,
I know in my experience, it's one thing to have to explain your field or your experience professionally, but it's
sure.
another thing personally. And that's
Yeah,
where I'm
sure.
like,
Okay, I got you there. Let
like,
me let me ask you this: how
mhm.
did you come to like Black history like you do?
So I was blessed to have experienced both my grandparents and my parents. And like most Black kids, when you have young parents, that's who raises you predominantly. I got to have my great grandmother until I was 16 years old, and I say that was my first best friend. And so I didn't truly know what loss was until she passed. And I even wrote a poem about her because her last few years were she was battling Alzheimer's, but I got to have that oral history, and she graduated from high school when she was 17 in South Carolina, and she also had a certificate trade. And then her telling me stories about World War II and how she met my great grandfather and just their migration from South Carolina to Detroit. And then my mother's mother, her story of how she ended up in Detroit. So just knowing that, and also them telling me like we weren't just slaves, that we were people and we brought things, and um learning how to cook. They didn't read recipes. They just like take a pinch of, if you use this, it's a quarter teaspoon, this is a teaspoon, there's a half a table, just fingers and their palms, and learning how to hand mix a cake as a little kid on a stool. So all of those histories, and my great grandmother, the way she would talk to God, it was not you sit in a pew, but she would talk to God while she was mixing a cake. Or so all of that history and learning about herbs and things of that nature and interpretation of dreams. So I knew we had all of this knowledge. And then, of course, when I got to college and learned about Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Haitian, and then subsequently Yoruba, and how that entire culture is oral. It's not necessarily written down. And I was like, oh, so that's how I got involved in learning about history and my history and the larger trajectory of it.
When someone like yourself decides that okay, this is a career path,
Mm-hmm.
my career path is to learn all I can and then to teach this. So I mean that's the how you make a living is by teaching it. But
Right.
what at some point do you say this is what I want to? Do you pick a particular topic in Black history, or how
So
does that work?
So what happened was I had dreams of just going into the arts because I'm a creative person by nature. So I was an only child until about six or so. So I knew how to entertain myself and go off into little worlds and stuff. So my undergraduate degree was in theater and dance. And so I did that. But studying dance with Black teachers brought me back to history again. So I was able to study with now a retired professor, Penelope Boldo, who is professor of dance at Mary Grove College, and now she's like emerita at University of Michigan, and she studied up under Catherine Dunham and has all of her notebooks. So learning that Afro-Caribbean dance, and then learning some of the West African steps, and learning all the history. And a step is not just a step, but you're doing this dance for celebration, for times of war, for sorrow. So all of that. So even in my artistic path, it was like, no, there's an intellectual aspect to doing what you do. Or even when I learned classical dance, every gesture, every movement is telling a story. So that's how that happened. And as time got older and the body does what it does, I was like, I got enough to teach. And everybody said throughout I would make a great teacher. And so of course you got to pay the bills, like you said. And so that's how it happened. And then I fell in love with it. But more importantly, I fell in love with the research aspect. And so I knew to pursue a PhD. And that's how
Okay.
it all.
What is the research aspect? What is I mean I know that's an easy
Mhm.
question, but what does a PhD teach you
So a
as the
PhD,
re yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
That's
a
it.
PhD, great question. I wish more people would ask this question. A PhD teaches us or makes us humble to the aspect that you made a lifelong commitment to learn until you cease to breathe. And what's going on now in culture is people truly aren't taking the time to really deal with the discomfort of learning. Everybody wants a quick answer. Oh, I can Google that. And it's like, all right, 20 minutes later, what was that thing you Googled? Because they didn't really learn it. They just learned to insert a fact. But what a PhD teaches you is you know so little. Even if you've read 20, 30 books, you still know so little because there's still so many facets to this gemstone. And that's one thing. So no matter what that area is, you know so little because there's so much out there that is yet to be collected. And that's the blessing and the burden of what that research teaches us.
Can you so what is your okay, let's go back
Mhm.
to this one. So let's say you pick a topic
Yeah,
and you know a little bit about it. Give me an example of how there is so much more expansion to this one little topic that a person needs to think about. You follow
sure.
my question?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
So, yesterday, we just started. This past week was our first semester back, our first week back for the winter semester at Wayne State, and I asked my students who were the first to discover the Americas. Columbus, and then another student was like the Vikings. No one said the people who are already here.
I got you.
You know, I
I
was
got you.
and I said, "Excuse you?" And they were like, "What?" I said, "What about the people who've been here for tens of thousands of years? How can you discover something that's already been settled?" That's like me coming to your doorstep and saying, "I discovered this historical home." And they're like, "No, but I got no, no, I discovered it." And they were like, I was like,
Right,
then I
right.
needed to say, "Why did you say that?" Well, that's what I was taught. And I was like, "All right, let's unlearn this." So that's just that alone.
Yeah, I got you. Because we rarely talk about the indigenous people that were already here.
Yeah, and they're so here. Even the names of like we got the Penobscot building, we got Port Huron, Lake, all of these names that signify that they were here. And even the original roads of a lot of streets that we still honor are the paths of the indigenous people.
That's right.
So there is that and then if you just go a little north of here by way of going especially towards Buffalo, that's where a lot of them resettle. But yeah, and then telling my students where those indigenous people ended up because of greed and supremacy. But yeah.
What is there a ha-ha moment for you in your studies or something like that when you were in school and it said, wow, I just could never do you remember any of one or two of those?
Yeah, one of the biggest is the myth about Detroit as being the site of the Underground Railroad. Because there's an erasure of the first 200 years of Detroit being Detroit or Detroit, the history of slavery here. That part was like, and it kind of I think I was in maybe undergrad, maybe a first or second year, and I was just like, but wait, isn't this city like an established city since 1704? And then there's at least 100 years prior, and the French had slaves in Louisiana. And then I started to dig, and I was like, oh.
Okay, 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 I got you.
Yeah, and luckily, I had a brilliant professor, Ellis Ivory, who was at because my undergrad was at Marygrove, and he taught African American history. And I remember one day knocking on his door, and I said, "Professor Ivory, like, why don't we ever talk about this?" And he was like, "Cause it's a better story to sell Second Baptist Church." And I was like, "Oh." And he was one of those professors who remind me of like a Howard Zinn who always about seeking the truth, even if it made people uncomfortable. And so he was like, go with it. And so then I started to go to the archives, the Burton Library and places like that, and like finding these dockets. And then, of course, then I just left it alone. And then Tia Miles wrote her book about the history of slavery here in Detroit and Canada. And that's another story. Like people don't realize Canada had slaves because it's always seen as this site of emancipation. And then Catherine McKittrick wrote Demonic Grounds, and she talks about the fire in Quebec and how enslaved women was falsely accused of starting that fire. And of course, she was executed. And we never talk about the executions of enslaved women or Black women, too. So, like, all of these, like, I was like, oh my
Yeah, yeah,
God,
yeah, yeah. Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah. And then I just recently came across an archive of this enslaved then emancipated person, Frances Thompson, who was living her life as a woman, but she was born male. And she sued because these people raided her home, and then she was assaulted. And so, like, all of these like moments, and I obviously I still have aha moments, but that first one
Yes,
is
yeah.
the history of slavery here in Detroit. I was just like, you
Yeah.
know,
Well,
yeah.
so much of, in particular, Black history, excuse me, and
Mhm.
I don't know how else to put it, has
Yeah.
like a negative slant to it. It's the
Hmm.
beat down of Black people.
Hmm.
Does that ever get to you to some point where you like, dang, and then you got to go with, let me tell you about a person who overcame that to help
Oh
you
yeah, like
get you
it,
back above water, or how does that work?
yeah. One of the things, regardless of how our ancestors got here, and up until 1867, realistically, we think about Juneteenth. Um, from every ounce, moment, grain of that long chunk of history, from the moment of capture to the moment of sometimes taking their freedom, they fought back. That is one of the myths, that we were just docile and yes, massa,
Yeah,
yes,
right. There you
like
go.
we were just like we just
Yeah.
took it, and it was like no, we did not. For the amount of people of African descent from enslavement, that population should be much higher, considering how often women took poultices and potions to abort the fetus, or uh, sometimes did what Margaret Garner did and just kill the baby, or sometimes died because they fought back. And all of these moments, and then after slavery, the amount of men and women and children who were lynched and killed just because white folks felt like they could do it. There's always a capital R resistance and fighting back. And when you read these archives of masters and mistresses, they were always terrified of us. Always, always, always. That's why the
Oh,
law,
really?
the yoke was so tight. And you read stories, even with Martha Washington, she was always sick. And you're like, why was she always sick? We know sanitation conditions in the 18th and 19th century were, ugh, but why? And I realized because a Black woman was cooking their food.
Oh,
And
really?
our ancestors knew herbs and knew ways to grind stuff up real fine, right? So, like, if you think about it, they were always sick or something was going on. And then when they got suspicious, they pulled back a little bit. Or oftentimes, those white women's babies didn't live very long.
Really?
Yeah. So, you think about ways in which, in there's a beautiful novel that came out recently called The Prophets, and it talks about that resistance. It's a novel, but when you read those archives, you're like, wait a minute. And Harriet Tubman's aunt was a root woman. She knew herbs because the master was always having seizures, or what they call fits.
That's you. Hold on, let me stop you. I
Yeah,
like this
go
because
ahead. Go
you
ahead.
don't hear this that often.
Oh no, no, no. Like, that's why those of us who got some sense, as the elders would say, automatically shoulder tap young people when they make these erroneous statements. We're like, we ain't nothing like our ancestors. And I'm like, no, you ain't nothing like your ancestors, because we are this level of strength compared to our ancestors. When you realize what they did, and even in the moments of being reduced to nothing, they fought back. They were resistant. They were resilient. And so we don't have oftentimes the cojones our ancestors had.
Okay, let's do
Yeah.
this because I know you.
Yeah.
I know this might be an easy one for you. Name a
Uh-huh.
couple stories, a couple people that we don't know that, like you just talked about. I didn't know the lady did Martha Washington in that way. Any a
Oh
couple
yeah,
names,
like I say, like
couple
you
names
read
that come to
it.
mind?
And with Saidiya Hartman's work and a lot of these what they called new historians or revisionist historians where they're like, wait a minute, you got to read in between the lines. Like if uh you have a slave master, a slave mistress who just did something foul to that person's child, why are they sick the next day? You know what I'm saying?
I
Or,
never thought of this.
right, if you just sold my baby off and I nursed your baby and you wonder why you keep having these dizzy spells and all of that, you ever wonder why, I might have put a little mugwort in your food or your soup, or, you're having violent vomiting or diuretic spells, or why the master got extra drunk and was knocked out for a day. Like people don't think about that because
Yes.
you know, um, and when women and why we have midwives and why the infant mortality rate even in those conditions without vaccines were very low for Black babies, and why the mortality rate is so high now for Black babies and mothers.
Yeah, I never thought of that.
Right. Like
So,
uh
so, so what? Give us examples of some of the things they would do. Then, how about that?
one thing I know from archival research is Black women invented the vaccine for smallpox.
Okay.
So, for example, we knew due to our oral knowledge of medicine, you have to expose a little bit of ourselves to the thing in order to build up immunity. So, an
Right.
enslaved
Right.
woman knew to do that. So, she was doing that amongst the slaves. So, it was this myth
No.
that like we were resistant, like we had the super gene to fight off smallpox, but literally we were just giving ourselves that, and then they got a hold of it, and so of course a white man gets credit for curing smallpox. So
Oh.
that's in the archive. But to answer your question more directly, um, there are so many accounts that we're starting to dig up of resistance in forms of fleeing, and forms of like I mentioned, Margaret Garner, which Toni Morrison bases her book Beloved on. This woman was enslaved in was it Kentucky, and she flees, and the master catches up with her, and instead of having herself and her children be brought back into slavery, she says, "Oh no," and like takes her children out by killing them. And
Oh.
yeah. And the thing about that story is, it's not that she killed her children, it's she destroyed her master's property because we were seen as property. So that's why he presses charges, because she was tried of destroying property.
I never even heard this story.
Yeah. So what happens is it's just a little clipping of this story, and you got to dig through the archives. And Toni Morrison, when she writes the Black Book, because her main job before she becomes the author, the Nobel Prize winning author, she was an editor. And so she is responsible for publishing so many authors that we know. She publishes Angela Davis's first book, Muhammad Ali's first, his autobiography. I mean, she to me is the reason why we have the arc of Black publications from the 70s to the mid 80s.
Really?
And then in the spare time, she's sitting there writing her work, and then she becomes the great Toni Morrison. But she comes across this clip when she's putting together the Black Book, and so she was like, I'm going to store it. And then she says one day she was just sitting there, and then the character just came literally out of the water to her. And hence why we get um, Beloved. And so, but that is a true story about Margaret Garner, where instead of seeing her kids be put back into slavery, she said, I'd rather kill them than to let them go back into shackles. And so, and that's such a deep philosophical question, because I work mainly in philosophy, even though I know the history. And so, what does love look like for an enslaved person? What does love
Okay.
look like for someone in the midst of Jim Crow? What does love look like with police brutality? What does love look like with infant mortality rates being the way they are for Black children and brown children and Black mothers, right? Like, what does that look like? Um, Black women are still having the audacity to still give birth to Black babies, knowing that the hospital could kill them. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get a doula and I'm going to get a midwife and I'm going to have that baby at home. Go back to the root,
Oh,
right? So there's a huge,
okay.
and that's why um, there's been legislative moves to have doulas and midwives covered in our healthcare system, and largely because of our white counterparts were like, that's way more organic and way more,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
women are like,
Yeah. Okay, well, that leads to this one then, and I
yeah,
think this is kind of what you were talking about. Man,
Mhm.
you jamming.
Thank you,
They
thank you.
talked about voodoo as one of those things, that was bad, but voodoo was just a science of the herbs.
Speak on it, brother. Speak
Okay,
on it. So
I-
here it is. I'm gonna
go,
give, I'm gonna
okay,
give
go ahead.
everybody the Cliffs Notes of the origin of voodoo in the Americas. So everybody treats those of African descent like, we just got that little wand waved in front of us like a man in black and all our memory was erased. But it was like, no, we brought that with us. And no matter how hard that crack of that whip and chopping off fingers and toes and branding us and beating us and all of those horrific things that they did to us, we still kept it in us. And so two events happened, one in South Carolina with the Stono Rebellion. That is still the largest rebellion in enslaved history. A lot of white folks died in that rebellion, so much so that they had to crank up the laws on enslaved people. So
Okay,
no,
hold on.
yeah, go
So
ahead.
for people who don't know the Stono, tell us a little bit about that.
So in 17, was it 39 in South Carolina? A lot of linkages back to South Carolina, right? Because that was one of the largest ports for enslaved Africans.
Right,
That's part of the reason why, and it's so close to the Caribbean
right,
geographically.
right,
So this is the rice plantation. This is an indigo plantation. So that dark blue dye that we wear in our blue jeans and you see it on China and all that dye that originates from Africa, by the way, which was sacred to our culture. And then they brought it over here because of the richness of that dye. But it's a very strong and can be toxic, right? So if you saw Daughters of the Dust, you see that the blue stained hands, that's that
mm-hmm,
dye. So they're
mm-hmm.
working in those plantations and they're even contemplating growing sugar. And those enslaved, so they're being exposed to malaria. Those plantations are brutal. And they're like, F this. No. And those enslaved men and women got together and took a lot of folks out. So much so that other people had to come from neighboring colonies and stuff to like get rid of them. And of course, the enslaved people were disbanded, but a lot of them fled to maroon places.
Right.
Anywho, as a result of this rebellion, they removed the right to assemble. That's why slaves couldn't gather, and that's why to this day, racist white people are like, oh, it's a lot of black people. What's going on? If you
Right,
notice,
right,
it's a
right,
group of black people, and white people see it, they're like, oh, hi, hi, what's
right,
they do
right,
this.
right,
But when we get
right,
together and just have a kickback, the police are called on us.
right. That's right. That's right.
Okay. So we couldn't gather. Don't let us read anymore because there was no laws on it quite yet. Uh only assemblies have to be monitored by white folks. Don't let them drum no more. Don't let them clang bells anymore. So the drums are African
Really?
people, right?
Yes,
So
yes,
all of those like direct ties to how to conjure spirit, because that's what drums do. That's what bells
yeah,
do. That's why when
yeah.
you hear what they call those flat-footed singers, they're calling literally spirit down because that's the history of how we talk to God.
Yes,
And so much so, in the black church, we call it catching the spirit, but
yeah,
in ancestrally, that's how spirit enters us, right?
yeah,
Is being
yes,
able to call it down. In Yoruba culture, that's called Oriki, which is a sacred song to channel God down.
yes,
So they were like, oh no. But what had happened was
yeah.
started being able to slap on our hands, being able to pound things, stomp, clap. And so that's how tap dancing originated, because we were able to replicate the drums with our hands and our feet. And also,
Uh,
and then scatting. That's another way to replicate a drum, right? Especially when you hear somebody go, right?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
a
yeah,
drum,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
So we
yeah.
didn't get rid of our culture. And then what happens is we let it get absorbed in Christianity, but also we invent this other thing called the ring shout. And if you've ever seen a ring shout, it's like you are going to a Vodun fete or a Yoruba fete, and they even go in the same circular direction as you would if you were in Dahomey, present day Yoruba land, or in Cuba or in Brazil. It's the same way. And even sometimes they make drawings on the floor, which is similar to a Vodun Veve.
Okay.
So that myth that Black Americans did not hold on to their African spirituality and ancestry and all of that is false.
There you go. Tell it.
I will say, as Christian as my grandmother is, she will tell you what she dreamt about last night. She will, if she smells like me brewing a tea, she'll ask for a cup of it, right? So those are that. And even my mother, she'll be like, hey, Juju, man, that's her nickname for me. What can
Mm,
I take to get rid of this thing? And I'll be like, oh, get some echinacea or get some
I love it.
yeah, so
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
so I
yeah.
say all that to say that's one example. To go to part two of this, Haiti, aka Saint Domingue, 1791. Similar situation, a bunch of pissed off slaves on a sugar plantation. The life expectancy of a slave on a sugar plantation is about 2 to 3 years. That's how brutal those conditions are. To turn sugarcane into sugar is a very physically arduous process, period. And you're under the lash of a whip in hot sweltering sun, and then you've got sugar boiling, so that's attracting all kinds of bugs. That hot sugar is imprinting itself in your skin, and then bugs will get on it. It's very brutal, very, very, very brutal. And so the slaves are pissed, and so Boukman was like, let's go to the mountains and talk, which means let's talk to God. And so Bookmom was like, but before we go, bring a wild boar. And so they bring a boar on the mountaintop, which is where the Maroon people were and believed to be the indigenous people who fled there. And that's why Haiti is called Haiti. That is to believe that is the indigenous word for that island. But I'll get back to that.
Yeah,
So he
okay.
brings that boar, and they start chanting and clinging and stuff. And all of a sudden, a storm comes and lightning strikes, and that ignites a fire. And then they offer that boar to the gods.
A boar is an animal, right? Yeah,
A boar is a
yeah. Is
wild
it
pig, a
a wild
wild,
pig?
wild
Yeah, yeah.
pig,
Okay,
right?
okay,
This
okay,
to
okay,
like give folks,
okay.
I'm
Right, right,
not
right,
saying
right,
all Old Testament, but a boar is
right,
a wild pig,
right, right,
often with horns and stuff. I
right,
mean,
right,
and
right.
I've seen one. I was like, ooh,
Yeah,
okay,
right, right,
that,
right, right,
like.
right. Yep, yep, yep,
So they
yep.
offer that, and so people's like, ah, and I'm like, offerings are in the Bible. That's what halal means. That's what kosher means. That is sacrifice. Hint, hint, wink, wink.
Okay,
So
okay,
they
okay.
do that, and they are able, after 13 years of consistent fighting and honoring their African roots, their African ancestry, their spirituality, and sense of being, are able to defeat one of the most powerful militaries, empires in the world. That's why Vodun is demonized, because that means it could defeat white people. That is
There
why,
you go. There you
if you
go.
think about it,
There
if
you
you
go.
got a spiritual system and those men and women and children, all they had were bayonets, whatever they could put their hands on, and they were able to beat a military that was backed by other European entities, including the US, and they still told them to go where the blank don't blank.
Right.
Why wouldn't you demonize that? Why wouldn't you demonize any sense of Black people, African descended people knowing their purpose and refusing to be under somebody's foot. Of course, you're going to demonize that.
That's right. That's right.
Of course, you're going to say it's demonic. First of all, there is no demonicness in Vodun. The belief of African spirituality is the dark or the bad is within oneself. We are responsible for how much pain, violence, etc. we inflict on each other. There is no outside boogity man. So that's number one. Number two, this idea of zombie is the belief that a force or person can take over one's mind. Sounds like a slave master to a slave, doesn't it?
Yeah, there you go.
That's really where zombie comes from, right? And so that's that belief. But yeah, of course you're going to demonize, villainize a system that emancipates the people that you once controlled. And Vodun, like all African spirituality, 99% of it is herbal medicines and having a connection with Mother Earth and Father Sky, right? It is the same thing that left white folks are trying to do now about like, we need to care about the earth, that we need to care. It was like,
Right, right, right.
already did that. You brought
Yeah.
us here for that purpose. And now you're being
Yes.
gaslight for not caring about the environment when you racially put us in environmentally unsafe places.
Yes. Because
Yeah.
there was a lady who was the I forgot her name, you know it, the queen of voodoo in Louisiana. What was her name? Do you remember?
Marie Laveau.
Yes.
Yeah. And the reason why she was the queen is because a white man went to her because he had a court case. He was like, I heard, you can do some things. So she was like, all right, I'll help you. And so for 2 weeks, she did her rituals and the guy was acquitted. And so he was like, we're going to leave y'all alone. We're going to let y'all do y'all thing over here.
Yeah, that's the
That's really
story.
that's why it was able to survive, because the white folks, as racist as they were, with their history of slavery and Jim Crow and all that, they was like, we're gonna leave these folks alone over here. As long as they stay over there on by Treme and that area, we gonna
Yes, yes, that is it. Yeah, because
so
I met a
yeah.
young lady on online or something who says she was her great niece.
Yeah, I would not
And I
doubt
did
it.
all my best to convince her to come on the show, but she said that she couldn't do it because it's such a taboo that
Yeah,
it wasn't a good look for her to come on the show and
you
tell
know,
about
it's
about her great aunt or something like
yeah,
that.
the thing is, I totally understand her kind of anonymity because in Nigeria right now, there's a campaign called Eshu or Papa Legba is not Satan, because there's such a strong evangelical Christian movement there uh, that anybody who practices or acknowledges their ancestry and their ancestral practices face a lot of harm. So there's a huge thing going on in places like the birthplace of Vodun in Benin, or the Orisha in Nigeria, or Brazil is going through a huge issue with preserving candomblé because of those evangelical Christian movements that have paired with these gangs that are there. So there's a lot of persecution that can happen if you outwardly come out as a practitioner of either Vodun or Orisha or whatever. It's very
Mm.
serious. Yeah, so I totally understand her, like,
Yeah, that's what she was
you
saying.
know.
I think the other thing that you come to and then
Mhm.
you're sharing so is that they did a mind game on everything good about black people.
Mhm. Yeah.
The go ahead.
No, absolutely. I mean, the amount of men and women who, I'll just use an example, this obsession with being thin. That is going on. Right now, there's a product called Ozempic, which is a diabetic medicine. It's for people with diabetes, but now it is considered the new weight loss drug. And I'm like, why are y'all obsessed with losing weight? Did the doctor say, anything's wrong with you? Did your lab results? No. I just want to be thin because, and I'm like, where did this obsession with thinness come from? Which is just one example of not loving
Right,
yourself. Right.
right.
And even our food and diets are demonized. Everything in moderation, of course, but like the thing that kept us alive and sustained us and honors our ancestry is now bad if we do it, but it appears in a gourmet restaurant. backed by white folks. So like all of a sudden, kale collards are super expensive. You know? So those are examples.
Yeah, there you
Yeah,
go.
like
There you
like
go.
how much does an oxtail cost now? My goodness,
Right, right,
but
right,
I still
right.
like to say that's just one example of not loving yourself and loving your culture. And you notice skin lightening is a global issue wherever there are African people now because we're told our skin isn't beautiful. Those same people want our lips and our backsides, but they don't want our melanin. They want our rhythm and
Yeah,
our blues. And I tell anybody like there is no such thing as good hair or bad hair. The only bad hair is if you don't grow any. Like
yeah, yeah, yeah. Tell it.
yeah,
I
like
love it.
I love my melanin, and if anything, I stay out in the sun so I get even more chocolate.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right.
So
That's right.
I
That's
grew up
right.
with that sense, and I grew up with a mother, who was like, we said it, we got brown, and people like, oh, you got black. We like, yes,
Yeah,
So,
yes, yes. I
but I
love it.
say all that it's
Yes.
sad because there still is this idea that if I can't be white, then I want my kids to become it, and that's farthest from the truth. And we see what's happening with the way the system is now, the way that we're still being criminalized at a higher rate
Yes, that's
our
right.
white or non-melanated counterparts. But
Right. That's right.
and then we got the government uh, per state trying to get rid of African American studies and Black studies, changing words from slave to worker. And last time I checked, workers got paid.
Yes, yes,
So,
yes,
so even the
yeah.
curriculum is trying to go back to Jim Crow days or so with what we're allowed to say and not to say. Um,
Yes.
and, and
Let me just couple more for
sure, sure,
sake of
sure.
timing and stuff like that. One of
Uh-huh.
the things that we talk about, and this goes to what you do in your study, is that
Mm-hmm.
we study history, Black history, as you do, so that it doesn't repeat itself. Is that part of your mission to bring to light these things so that at least we can say, watch out for this?
Absolutely. Part of my mission is if nothing more my students walk away with is the freedom to question everything and to think about why things are the way they are and not say this is the worst it's ever been. Those
All
things.
right.
Because that was like my biggest like how dare you say that? Like, oh, this is the worst ever. I'm like,
Yeah,
my
yeah,
ancestors survived all
yeah,
these things. This is not,
yes.
somebody occupying the White House from 2016 to 2020 is not the worst. White folks getting so upset and overthrowing government. I'm like, that's happened often. That's why we've had civil wars. Like,
Yes,
like this is not
yes,
the worst. Or realizing don't blame people who are in dire situations for their conditions. Blame the powers that be. So those are the things I want my students and anyone who breaks bread metaphorically or literally with me is to be like, wait a minute, it's not that person's fault directly as to why they stole a car radio. It's not that person's fault why they're on public assistance or why someone is living in dire situations or even substance abuse. That's often socially impacted responses to their conditions. And also, there may be mental health concerns. So
yeah,
why
yeah, right, right,
blaming the least of these and real like does anybody really need $1 billion? Like, do we
right,
really need
right,
billionaires?
right.
Really
Okay,
billionaires? Like,
I
no,
got
like,
you. I got you.
our elders deserve health care. They should not be rationing how much money for their medications or their food. They
Yes,
contributed 65, what is it, up to age 65 worth of labor. We should be taking care of them,
yes. Okay, I got
Yeah.
one more. How about this
Yeah.
one? And
But,
your opinion. Give me a historical
mhm.
story that would close us out that we need to be most proud of. I know Haiti is one of them, but I
Mhm.
like a little small story that you know of. Something happened in South Carolina where they did something and then became such great people. Let me give you an example of the one I
Okay.
might lead you into. It is the what happened in Mount Bayou.
Mhm.
and how that guy on that plantation, and I'll say this, the enslaver allowed his enslaved to learn how to read and write and operate their own schools and things of that sort. When they got their freedom, they then moved to another territory and then were able to operate under that same condition
Mhm.
among themselves. Is there another one like that that comes to mind that you say, if y'all didn't know anything else, know this story?
You know, I won't even say one story.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah, yeah.
say there are, I will even leave us with this. It is our absolute duty to talk to the oldest person we know, whether it's our relative, somebody who lives down the street, etc., because it will unlock so many passages and safes to who and what we are and the legacies that we led behind. Um, my dear friend Deborah Cervani, her husband, who's now passed on, John, told me a beautiful story about his migration from Yugoslavia to here and why he made it his mission to be anti-racist. He said when they migrated, they were fleeing the Holocaust and they were on that boat for however long it took, and somebody stole all their food. He, his siblings, his family, and they were starving. And he said, this tall African man with pearly white teeth looked at him and reached in his pocket and gave him a candy bar. And then fast forward, he meets Coleman Young because they were both students at Wayne State and so on and so forth. I say all that to say, as a people, we all have an innate ability to know what not having and what it means to share the little bit that we have. So we have such a beautiful oral history that it would be disrespectful to our ancestors to not sit with the oldest person and pick their brain and know what they know, because there's so much history just in our city alone of people like that. So I say it is our duty as Black folks in particular to collect those stories, and we'll walk taller, be prouder, and really own our legacies, our living legacy of just being embodied selves of why we matter in this space. We built this for free, and we will build and continue to have long lasting institutions long after we leave. So I leave us with that task more so than just one particular
I
story.
got you. I love it.
Yeah, because
I got
yeah.
one more question, man.
Go
It's,
ahead,
it's
go
not a
ahead, go
question, it's more
ahead.
a statement.
Go
Does
ahead.
it upset you when Black people say we have not succeeded, and all the other issues that they say is wrong with us, when
Yes.
when you know and I know that there's so many that counteract those thoughts?
Absolutely. Number one, and that's why I could never say I can't be a pessimist per se. I understand pessimism and sometimes I'm there. The fact that we're still here after a 500-year project of trying to annihilate us.
There you go.
500 years, and I'd say about 1460-ish, the trading of Africans began. And then since, Columbus and all of that, and by 1510 or 15, so 500 years till now of trying to annihilate Black folks, and we're still here.
There you go.
We won.
Right, right,
we,
right, right.
you know, I wouldn't turn down a paycheck via reparations,
Right, 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 right. Sure,
but I
sure.
already won because I'm still here. And you have to deal with us because we won't go away.
There you go. With
Yeah.
that said, have you written a book or anything? How can we promote
So,
you, stay in touch,
yeah, thank
what
you
you're
for that
doing?
question. And now I feel like I got
Yeah, 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 you
that's
do.
when Rocky gets on the top of that hill when he
Yeah,
was
there you go.
with the dog. Uh, I am working on a book right now, and it's called the Case for Reparations. And it's not reparations from the financial aspect, but it's really like, how do we, as a community of Black folks, think about reparations? What does it mean for us to love all of us, regardless of what, of our, conservative politics or whatever? Then once we love on each other unconditionally, or just respect each other unconditionally, then we can push back and say, this is what we want. So that's what the text. So it's basically from the idea of an imaginary domain, a space for us to imagine that we not only occupy but thrive on, and then we can push back against anti-Black racism and ask for restorative justice. Because I want to be respected when I'm at the checkout line at the grocery store or I'm literally jogging in my neighborhood. I care more about that necessarily than just cutting a check. I need you to think about that.
I
Uh,
got you. I love it.
yes,
I
that
like
so
where you're
that's what
going
that
for.
book is about.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
you know whenever it comes out, and I
yeah,
know you're working on it, and you're gonna get
yes.
it done. You follow through. Yeah, and any point after this, before that, come back on the show. We
Oh,
only covered a little bit. I
oh yeah,
understand.
just a
Yeah,
little
just a little
speck.
bit. There's much more
Yeah.
that can be said, and we'll talk offline because I got some plans for you, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. I plan
Yeah,
on
you
seeing
know,
you next month
yeah.
for a talk you're giving. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, cool,
yeah,
cool, cool.
yeah.
Thank you for coming on the show, everybody. Woo,
Yes.
did he explain it? Did you get drunk off of this? Did he intoxicate your mind? I just, man, I did what I could to ask a question. Let me tell you, folks, hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspirations. Hit the like button on this because there is no love button, and I know you loved it. Hit the notifications bell. Tell somebody about Strong Inspirations. We're gonna stay in touch with this brother, no question, and promote the book when it comes out and his efforts because he's on to something big with this thought process. And he ended up with how we need to with a game plan. There's a game plan in place, and it's easy to do. You can do that tonight. And they've got me some thinking too. And so go to my website, everybody, businessintheblack.net. Watch my movie, Business in the Black. It's on Amazon. Read my book, Black Business Book, and come to my festival too. More information is on the website and the events that I do and speak and so on and so forth. Let's stay in touch with this brother. He's on to something big. He's going to be a national figure in a matter of moments. Watch. Don't be scared of that neither, man. Don't
Thank
be
you for
scared
that.
of it. Don't
I
be scared of it.
received
Don't be
that.
scared of
I
that, man.
received that.
This
Thank
thing is
you.
bigger than you because you already thought it through. All you got to do is let it communicate. And I'm letting Strong Inspirations be part of how it communicates to the world. And so I say this to you, and I mean this with all sincerity. I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love what you're doing, what you became, what you are, because you grew up as you did. And you didn't let them change you. Because some of them tried to. Some of them said something to you. I'm sure time again, they thought you were different. Hey, you ain't like the rest of them. You know how you hear them comments. So come over here and lose that. And you said, no, that, nah, no. I'm going to deal over here and y'all come to me. Beautiful thing. And for getting that doctorate too. And for following it up. Did your parents, I mean, your mom still alive? Did they all see you get it and
Yeah,
everything?
so thank you for that question. I'm so blessed that I got to share it with my grandmother, who's, been my biggest champion since I can remember, and my mother. And we had a little scare there, but she's fine now. And my mom and, all my living women in my family came all the way to New York because that's where I got my PhD at St. John's, and they were there for me when I got hooded. So
Oh man, that's good.
I'm very blessed that they got to see that.
Yes,
And
good,
my
good.
oldest cousins were there too.
Yeah,
So,
good, good. We
yeah,
all proud of you, man.
thank you.
All right. Do you speak another language or something like that?
So I can communicate in Yoruba pretty
Okay,
decently.
okay. How about this? If that's the case, close us out in goodbye and whatever, however you want to say it.
Uh, Esheo, Bogbog Omo, Africa, Odabo, which means thank you very much, children of Africa, and see you soon.
Ace. That's it. Thank you.